All right. Welcome, everyone. We are so pleased to have you back for the second in our webcast series, which we called Realizing the Value of Gen AI Through Organization Transformation. My name is Ian Lee. I lead our Gen AI advisory and our org transformation practice here at Cognixia. I am joined today by a very special guest. His name is John Candeto. He's founder and managing partner of Workforce Data Alliance. Today, as a second part of our series, we're going to talk about the impact of generative AI on how it's changing the workforce and how we're moving from labor to automation. But before we get going on that, John, I'd love it if you could just introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about Workforce Data Alliance.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here. So quick background. I had a stint in strategy consulting. Most of that was business transformation earlier in my career, then spent a decade building enterprise software as a service, then left that world a few years ago and launched a private investment partnership. And then I got together with a couple of close friends and partners and formed the Workforce Data Alliance. And here we are.
Dan, tell us a little bit about what WDA is focused on.
Yeah, so that cocktail of having delivered transformation as a consultant, then building software, which was in a very similar space, software that was often in the middle of transformations, and then being an investor as well, and sort of looking at businesses through the perspective of the owners of the firm, led to kind of an interesting cocktail in terms of the information flow that I kind of sit within and how I think about things. And so when my partners and I were kind of thinking through WDA, our earliest convictions were really around the many ways that businesses can improve business performance through making better workforce decisions. And so that's the crux of everything we do. And of course, as we were doing that, a piece of that was how does Gen AI play into that? And so we were, reading the research, both the economic research on, kind of how will this affect economies, how will it affect businesses, and the research on how does this affect workforce and how does it affect work. And what we came up with was really this idea of you can actually combine those different types of research to get a pretty clear view of here's the work that can be impacted by generative AI today, what we know is coming, and then what we don't know much about so far. And so you can get a sense of, okay, here's how the work will be impacted. If you have a sense of how that plays in through workers, i.e. workforce, then you can get a sense of how will this impact roles within businesses. You can roll that up and say, how will this impact a business as a whole? How will this impact a competitive area of a business domain or domains, and so on. And so we built, we have a software platform that accelerates much of the work we do. And a piece of that is helping clients understand, where can you get the benefits of Gen AI today at the role level, and specifically what work does that impact, and what steps could you take to actually go get that?
That is super exciting. And it's for all those reasons that I'm so excited to have this dialogue with you today, to take a data-driven approach to understanding the impact and the implications of Gen AI on the workforce is something that I think is absolutely critical in a very fast-moving landscape here, and something that all enterprises need to take notice of and start to bring into consideration as they start to do their experimentation, their POCs with specific use cases around generative AI. So on that note, I'd love to hear a little bit about how you see the nature of technology changing the way the workforce interacts, as we think about wider spread use of generative AI in its various forms.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a critical point, and I think it's more critical because I don't hear it mentioned very often. So we have 100 years, if you go back to the kind of 20s and 30s when mainframe computing was being invented. So for about 100 years, we built, for the most part, we built deterministic systems. And what do I mean by that? So in the 80s, we cooked up Excel. If you put in 5 plus 5 into Excel, it equals 10. It equaled 10 in the 80s, it equaled 10 in the 90s, it equals 10 today, as that software has evolved. And so we're used to these worlds of whether it's Salesforce or Workday or any kind of software where if you do the same thing, you get the same result. And the way generative AI works is very different. It works off basically a web of probabilities that is larger than the human brain can fathom. And why that's important is if you ask Gen AI a question, if you said, look at my CRM and tell me what, clients I should be interacting with more, something like that. It will make a probabilistic guess as to what the first word of that answer should be. And then it will guess at the second word and the third word and so on. It will give you an answer that ultimately, the reason these systems are cool is they actually sound very believable and very human. They have no idea what they're saying, nor do they have a way in some sense to completely fact check themselves. They are a probabilistically driven engine that has a pretty good chance of saying something intelligent, but it's not 5 plus 5 always equals 10 like it is in Excel. And so the reason that's important is twofold. One, we need to understand that that's the case, that's the domain we're in. And so, GenAI is not going to solve everything. We actually need the humans as much as we ever have. But we need the humans focused on slightly different things. GenAI can now bite off pieces of work that were just far too complex for deterministic systems to bite off. So the robots can do more. In some sense, the robots have gotten smarter and better, but actually that means we need more of the humans to monitor, manage, and do the things that the robot either can't be sure it's right about and or doesn't know how to do and doesn't even know it doesn't know how to do. That's point one. The second point, the last point is we also need to understand that learning how to get the benefits of these systems in some way is emergent. So, if I pitched you Excel, I would say, hey, look, 5 plus 5 equals 10. And by the way, this is the world's coolest calculator, and I'll show all that to you. And I would give you the same pitch over and over and over for years and years and years, and that sold Excel and all the other deterministic software that we have. With GenAI, it's we don't know quite where it will land, right? We've sort of built an engine that is so capable, but we don't know how useful it's going to be inside CRM systems or inside human capital systems or inside Microsoft Word or inside email. We're learning that, we're discovering that. It's the properties and use cases are emergent. And so that means rather than going and buying a system or using a system, assuming it's deterministic, we need to go understand that we're going to go on a journey with it. We're going to have to discover where it's useful. And sometimes we'll hit dead ends. We need to stop those. Sometimes we'll find, huge areas of opportunity we never would have fathomed would be there. And we need to double down on those.
I find that fascinating. I love the notion of what you just said is that we are taking a journey with the technology at the same time. It's not as if it's a perfect system or a perfect set of capabilities. It continues to evolve at a breakneck pace. I mean, one of our executives recently attended a conference at OpenAI and heard from Sam Altman that the next version of ChatGPT is going to be built on a model that is 100 times more powerful than GPT 4.0 in its current state right now. So it's astounding to think what the probabilistic capabilities are in the very near term. And with that reality in the not too distant future, what are some of the implications? What do you believe we need to do about that from workforce consideration perspective?
Yeah, I think, and that's really well put. I think our human species is learning what to do with capabilities and software that are getting 100 times better in the space of a year. Yeah, I mean that's a level of nonlinearity that nobody's good at nonlinear, but that's a level of nonlinearity that we haven't figured out as a species yet. So we need to have some humility in that. We need to also know that that's, as you said, that's a journey we have to go on. I would be very skeptical of anyone who says we have it all figured out and here's how to do it, because that just can't be the case if a field is getting 100x better every year or a few years or so on. So that's one. More broadly, I think I like to put this against the lens of how have technology solutions changed? So we talked about how the technology itself has changed. The solutions, if we go all the way back to the 30s and 40s, we had mainframe computing first, where you would get a new mainframe every 5 or 10 years. So we were sort of updating the capabilities of the compute, let's say every decade. Then we went to hosted solutions where you could upgrade software every few years, and eventually that was every few months. Then we invented software as a service. And so now you have deployment in the software universe every second of every day. And so we've sort of, we've gone from an evolution that's happening on the order of, say, decades to days. And what that means is from a workforce perspective, it's not necessarily the case that one will need new large, heavy solutions and new specific point solutions and new software and so on to get all the benefits of generative AI. I'm not saying that won't happen. I'm certain there will be wonderful things built. But if you look at what Microsoft has done with Copilot 365, if you look at what Google's done with Workspace and embedding Gemini, that stuff is just there. right? I mean, I was trained as a financial analyst, and when I was taught to use Excel, it was a whole lot of grunt work because the computer couldn't do it, and so I had to learn to do what the computer couldn't. If I trained as a financial analyst now, I should be taught how to direct the robot to do the work. And it's just a fundamentally different paradigm, but it's how you get the benefits. And so my point is, you have to understand that we're in this massively compressed software upgrade cycle, which means that a lot of benefit one can get, you will buy new solutions, but also you have to look at how rapidly the solutions you already have are getting better. And a lot of the benefit you can realize from GenAI will be from the workforce using tooling and software, some of which you already have. And you just need to go on that change journey to learn how to use it and how to deliver your work in a more productive way with the improved tooling.
Mm-hmm. So with the exponential increase in power and capability of the technology, how do we need to think about that in terms of assessing that the impact on the workforce and potentially redeploying resources, redefining roles? Tell us a little bit about that. How can organizations take a concerted approach towards doing that assessment and then determining what to do about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in one sentence, I think automation is the new outsourcing. From kind of starting in the 70s, roughly, with telephone technology kind of getting up to speed, up through I'd say the 2010s. Labor arbitrage was really, where can I do the same work cheaper? And now, but that's because labor did most of the work. And now we're entering an era where technology is doing more and more of the work, which means you care less about the total cost of labor and much more about where the capabilities are to get the machines to do the work. And again, we need the humans to direct the machines, but the more the machines do, the machines are relatively cheap versus everything else. And so, it's really about how do we best use automation. So to answer your question, I think there's two simple answers. One is, it's critical for management and managers of the workforce to know what is possible, what's possible to get from GenAI today. What do we know is coming down the pipe, and what can we just not see yet, so we don't have an expectation around it? The reason that's important is you can't change things you can't see. And we know just basic things. What's measured improves. What's rewarded gets repeated. What's reported gets done. So if we don't have a way to measure, if we don't have a way to reward when someone figures out a great new use case for GenAI that speeds up some work, report on what's happening and if we're not doing those things, we shouldn't expect any benefit. Humans generally don't change automatically; they go on a change journey. And so, and part of what we do at WDA is, as I said earlier, we look inside the workforce and we say, okay, here's the level of productivity increase we see for these types of work. Here's where that work is done in the organization, i.e. at the role level. And therefore, here's the rough kind of, potential business case for change in that area. And I would say two things about that. One is that lets you set an expectation of, hey, here's what's possible today and what resource we might put behind change or improvement. It also gives a sense of how might I think or rethink about doing that work, as you suggested. So, for example, we just did some work with a client, and they had a couple thousand contractors doing various types of technology work. And one question we had for them was, how often are you reviewing your SLAs with your contractors? Because particularly various types of engineering and R&D and so on are getting 10, 20, 30, 40% productivity boost from using GenAI, for example, to code. And it's astounding. And I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't lived it. I've had cases in the last year where I've sat with Copilot in Visual Studio and written software in an afternoon that a decade ago took me a year to write. And it's very hard to get the brain around that. But it is true. And it's not just GenAI. The open source movement helps massively. Just general free unlimited compute helps, et cetera. But the cocktail of these things is potent. And so when we talk about getting the benefit, in the workforce, you have to know what to expect, where to expect it, and then go on a journey to get it. Otherwise, I don't think you will. And then outside the workforce, are thinking about other ways you could deliver work. You have to engage contractors in a way where you expect these benefits to accrue to you, not to them. You could imagine many contractors with 8 hour a day, and they're writing code in 4 hours that used to take 8, who gets the benefit. And then even things like open roles. Very often we'll go to a client. We went to a large medical devices company recently, and They were trying to hire 600 people, and we, kind of put those open roles through our algorithm and said, we think you need about 450 of these. And it's not because you don't need the people. Actually, we think you're going to get a lot more from the people in these roles you already have. So you need more resource, but not quite as much as you think. It was something like 15 million a year they would save through that. And it was just because this was sales and marketing. Largely more junior sales and marketing resources were able to get much more efficient through some of these new generative AI capabilities. So that's know what to expect. And then that's setting the expectation, whether it's roles, contractors, workforce, that you'll get it.
Yeah, that is all fascinating. I mean, it's exciting. It's a little overwhelming and bewildering, but it's encouraging at the same time to see that organizations like yours have a thoughtful and data-driven approach to the analysis of that and what steps can be taken. John, I know you and I could spend hours talking about this. We've committed to our audience that we're going to, knock these topics off in snackable chunks. But I know that, we're going to continue the conversation as well. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. No doubt we're going to get some inquiry from our viewers, and we'll have the chance to follow up with you. But thank you again for joining us. This was the second part in our series. To our audience, I'll say that, some of the things that John hinted at, we've got coming up as well in our next part of the series. We're going to talk about how do we address training, the reskilling and upskilling components of what needs to be undertaken for that workforce transformation. And John, you said something that is absolutely critical to this process as well. How do you manage change, both on an individual, a team, and an enterprise basis? And so we're going to be addressing that in another episode coming up as well. So, John, thank you again for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. As always, I always walk away with a few gems of wisdom and lots to think about. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.